Hey, it's Chris. I'm going to run you through some of the latest hotness, breaking it down, mini reviews, everything you need to know to help you decide if some of this stuff, is it too hot to handle? Is it getting all the hype? Or is it really just hype in the first place? What do you need to know? Help you find right things for your table. Let's go. So Daily Magic sent me a copy of Shadow Kingdoms of Valeria. This is very similar to your other Valeria games in terms of setting and aesthetic, but it twists up the dice worker placement mechanic. And I'm going to go out on a limb and say this is actually probably their best game. Period. Now stay with me because it's important to know that I'm not a big dice worker placement fan. I much prefer your deck building. I much prefer your roll and writes. But this one has enough twist on it that this may be one of my favorite dice worker placement games as a whole, because of the dynamic that it offers you differently from some of the other ones. And the board here looks very complicated to begin with. You have 6 different total areas that you're going to be selecting dice from, or worker placement spots, if you will. The 5 in the middle, and then you actually have your own worker placement spot on the board. And the interaction here is going to depend heavily on the player count. The 2-player versus the 3 and 4 player is going to be dynamically, significantly different. And that may be the biggest turn on or turn off as a whole. Essentially what you're doing is you're drafting these dice to then allocate them in order to fight battles, in order to achieve then your said victory points that you're going to be scoring along the outside. The value of the dice is going to be directly dependent on the discount that it gives you on the action that you were taking in each of these 5 different areas in the first place. Everything from grabbing your battle plans to drafting your mercenaries or scoring your endgame victory points, if you will. And the interesting dynamic here as a whole is also that 6th spot that I mentioned. Not one of the 5 shared spots, but your individual board spot in the first place. Now, the individual board space here, divided up between your main board and your sideboard, is very interesting because it's giving you a very different dynamic than what you may be used to. You actually have your own spots blocked off by your icons here that will allow you to slowly upgrade, and I love this mechanic. It's done in Scythe, but I much prefer it more in this. And so essentially, as you're going along, as you complete these battles, you get to take one of these little tokens off of the various spots in your boards, anywhere from giving you more dice slots in order to fight those battles to score higher amounts of victory points, as well as one that's actually going to allow you to progress right here further up this track for your resource management in general. Because when you're doing these battles, you have a dynamic that you take the lower value of the sum of the dice versus wherever your little green marker is. Lower one scores you the victory points. Then you also take these tokens and you move them over to the sideboard here that you collect a pattern on potentially, which is also another endgame scoring condition, but it also gives you a variety of access to not only other ways of scoring here in the purple, but also bonuses that are unlocked when you have 2 that are encircling a spot in the first place. The other cool aspect of this game is it ties in with the deck building aspect of Valeria, if you're familiar with that, via your 3 different levels of mercenaries here. Your instants, your passives, and your end games. And you're going to be drafting those, but again, you have a limitation based on the side of the board that unlocks over here that shows you how many you can have at any point in the game. And as you're getting these, you're either going to get instant resources, passive actions or income as you're going along, or end game scoring victory points, depending on how many you've already bought. Because you can see the values here along the left-hand side, 1, 3, and 6, but they have a little plus sign next to them, meaning for everyone that you've already bought at that level, it's going to cost you an extra gold, and gold being one of your 3 resources, magic being the other, which allows you to manipulate values at said areas in the first place, as well as that influence that I mentioned that's going to affect the battles. Now, this game is really nice. It flows very smoothly. Now, I mentioned the player counts, though. The player count is probably going to be the biggest dynamic that you may need to worry about, because essentially on your turn, all you're doing is you're moving your little action token here around from one place to the next of these 6. And you can't stay in the same place. But the only limitation is that there has to be a die there that you can collect, and you have to collect that die. Well, you don't have to keep that die and put it in your spot in case your spots are full, but you have to be able to grab one. So if there are no more spots over here where I go and hire my mercenaries, I just can't do that even if I have 37 gold. So that is the dynamic, because as you're going along, when there is the number of dice equal to or lesser than the player count, you pull all the dice back out from the bag, refill back up to 4 or so in each area, depending again on the player count, and then it opens wide back up. So obviously at a 3 or 4 player count, the dynamic of the dice on the board, not only the numerical values that are going to be present in each area, the color of the dice, because that also matters too in order to achieve these battle scorings, if you will, you can see there, but also in addition to the number, which you're always constantly yin-yanging between the overall value it's going to give you for victory points for said battle versus the discount you need in order to take the action in the first place. And I cannot tell you how smooth that this works. 2 is going to give you the most optimum engine building, a pure, efficient, how much better than I am than you. But the 3 and 4 is going to give you a little bit of chaos, a little bit of not really take that, but a little bit of cut you off and force you to be more tactical. And I would say 3 is probably my sweet spot, but playing a 2-player engine build dice worker placement with my wife was absolutely fantastic in that sense, because I don't have anything else that incorporates this dynamic. A few endgame scoring conditions up here, which actually, again, from a mechanic I like, you do not just get them when you get them. I hate that mechanic. You actually have to take an action in order to score one of these endgame scoring conditions, and that may be the dynamic that goes down here in the pattern that goes onto this board as you're filling these into the spots here. It may be how many of the battle ones you have here with 4 different dice icon needed on them, and it just gives you a whole wide variety. There's a little promo expansion, there's a Riftlands expansion that goes along with that adds some more dynamic, and it just really is a great experience overall. I'm probably actually surprised, and this is better than I was thinking. I didn't go into this saying, yeah, I'm going to like this. I went into this saying, okay, I kind of know Valeria. I kind of like dice worker placement. Is this going to suit me? Because the other ones I haven't been as much enamored with lately in terms of Wayfarers of the South Tigris, Collab, even a couple of the others that I've come across. It's always been a little bit tricky in terms of I know what I'm doing, but am I actually enjoying myself with worker placement? And with this one, it's not dependent on the dice. You're not going to be worrying about necessarily what the dice are rolling and how chaotic it's going to be from that standpoint. So you don't have to worry about if you're that sort of person, but it takes the dice and just utilizes them in the sense that it's going to play in your strategy and they're already determined out on the board, which works. The biggest issue with this game as a whole is that if you don't have the battle cards, you don't have the battle lineup over here that matches with your dice in your board, you potentially have wasted turns because your 2 gray and 1 brown here don't line up with anything that's available. And that's kind of where the magic mitigation comes in with this resource, because you can cycle a bunch of these out, move them down and put a bunch more back out here in order to achieve whatever you're trying to get, or in order to get one that'll match what you've got, because otherwise you're trying to then discard these dice, especially if you don't have the full slot arrangement opened up. And that can be anticlimactic if you're struggling from that aspect. And that's where the randomness of the deck pulls and the unlucky dice pulling and the indirect player interaction may be not your favorite thing in the first place. And the game goes, until you get 7 of these filled out, which again sounds long. And it could be at maybe say a 4-player count, but at 2 and 3, it hums and flows rather smoothly. Again, better than I was expecting, which makes this really a game that I would recommend picking up if you like dice worker placement. It's not going to be as heavy as you may like, but the upgrade system is nice. It's unique, and it's got enough elements. And the other thing that I look at with this type of game nowadays is, do all of these boards, do all of these elements, the endgame scorings, the mercenaries, the dice worker placement allocation areas, the battle side of things, the token board over here, do they all actually make sense? If I didn't have one of them, or was one of them not nearly utilized as much? And the honest answer to that is no, they all worked really well, which again has been a big surprise to me because I have not felt that way about other worker placement games. So there you go, Shadow Kings of Valeria. Color me very impressed. Next up, Solis Game Studio sent me a copy of Pocket Paragons. And if you know me, I'm a little bit biased towards my 1 versus 1 card-based battling duelers, right? Yomi's, Battlecons, Exceeds, Senjutsus, Ivions, that style of game. And so when I looked at this as another head-to-head dueler, and they took it as Acquisitions Incorporated from their latest crowdfunding, I said, okay, I'm an Ackwing, sort of fanboy. Let's see what you got going on here. And if you're not familiar with this, essentially what you've got 7 cards in your hand, and you're just playing one of them every single turn until somebody gets knocked out. Sounds a very familiar concept. Well, this different spin on it, or what makes this one unique or different than those other ones that I mentioned, though, is this is more like paper, scissors, rock, lizard, Spock, if you're familiar with that. And so essentially what you've got going on is you've got a different set of combo or countering cards that all have slightly different abilities here to battle or knock out your opponent in slightly asymmetric ways. So here, for example, you can see I've got Mr. Omen drawn versus Mr. Jim Dark Magic. And, you know, I'm a big Jim Dark Magic fan in general, so I'm always going to root for him. But essentially what you've got going on is they have their little character card here. Then each of them has an asymmetric sort of superpower, special ability, if you will. Some of them are passive, some of them are pick up and put in your hand and do a bunch of damage, and it just depends on how much energy in order to activate them is needed. So in case of Omens here, it tells you down at the beginning here, if you have 1 energy, it gets activated here, if you can see that just off camera. And then Jim's actually says down here in the lower left-hand corner, it needs 3. And so once it gets 3, then you just pick it up and put it into his hand. And so essentially all you're doing on a card-by-card, turn-by-turn basis is picking one of these cards, again, all different colors, all different symbols, utilizing that card and playing whatever effect it has in a paper, scissors, rock, lizard, Spock sort of scenario here. You have blocking, you have healing, you have piercing damage, you have regular attacking damage, and we'll talk about that because that has a little bit different execution at the bottom. And then you also have a little bit of a magic or different striking, as well as everyone having a same rest card. Resting essentially allows you to gather all these other cards that you've played back into your hand. But the asymmetry of maybe how this interacts with you is where the shining of this, as well as the slight detriment, is going to come in. Because as you can imagine, the main other mechanism of this game, how you get energy to utilize these special abilities in the first place, well, you have to counter somebody else's attack. How you do that is each of these at the top here, these green, blue, red, and orange, all have things at the bottom that say it counters blue. Orange counters blue. Green counters orange. Then blue counters green. And if you do that, you get an energy, and then the other person's card actually just gets put back into their hand, doesn't take effect. Therein lies the difficulty in the meta bluffing, if you will, where the I know what you know what I think you're going to do on the turn-by-turn, next turn bluffing basis. Because the other main dynamic of this game that sets it apart from those is you have this red card here, and this is your insta-kill. If you time this card at the exact time when your opponent goes to refresh their hand and play their rest card, you automatically win. Well, except for, you know, one character, which can't actually be executed because she's a lawful good paladin, but that's besides the point. But otherwise, this happens and you win. So why would you rest then? Well, that's the other way besides countering, is you get an energy. And you get all the abilities you've used back in your hand, including the one that does 3 damage, and you only have 10 health to start with. So 3 damage, or Jim's 5 ultra kill here, that's half your health right there. That's half your health. That's insane. And so, yeah, you're going to want to get those into your hand as quickly as you can, or you're going to want to rinse and repeat and spam that one. But if you spam the orange one, then I just pull out my blue one here and I counter you and you don't get anything off, and now you take 2 damage. And so therein lies the dynamic difficulty of this game, is unlike some of those others, unlike your Yomis or Battlecons like Siege, where you're playing a little bit more off of perfect information or the closer strategic value of that game as a whole, this one is more just pure bluffing, guessing, and like I mentioned, paper, scissors, rock, lizard, Spock. And that's going to appeal to some people because literally a game of this will take you 5 minutes. And that is probably the biggest boon compared to those other ones, right? Like, there is a significant overhead in Exceed. There's a significant dynamic of analysis paralysis when you have a card that can be played in any one of 3 to 4 different ways on your turn. And then the dynamic strategy of learning those cards, learning this fighter's strengths, weaknesses. Well, it's all of that just incorporated into a 7-card, you know, nutshell poker draw, if you will. And that's the other side of things that people aren't going to like, is that it's just completely random sometimes. You just completely guess wrong. The other person just plays stronger, faster, quicker than you, and they're just better at this style of things than you, and there's not going to be anything that you can do to make up, compensate, or figure out what you are doing wrong. The blessing in this game is you've got, like, I don't know, 7 characters, and then you find the one that suits you maybe a little bit more, because all of them do give you a little bit asymmetric style. Even the orange cards here, for example, are significantly different when you pull Jims versus Omens. Omens does 3 damage and blocks a damage if you are dealt any. If you have 3 energy, though, you block all the damage. Jims just makes you discard a card from your hand, and if you have an energy, you get to also block a damage. So the actual colors are still all asymmetrically different for the most part, except for maybe like your slight defends and your rests, which is cool. And I wasn't expecting it to be as dynamically different between characters, which is nice, because the last thing I want in a game like this is to be just completely the same characters. I want to have some flavor, some flair, some, pin Office Space style, if you will, a little bit more than that. And it does. But at the same time, it's so random at times that you're not going to feel as in control. And for a lot of us that do these 2-player duelers, I want to feel like the better person won. And this game won't give you that. It won't. But it'll be a lot easier overhead wise. It'll be a lot easier to learn, teach, and play and hit the table multiple times in all the time that it would take to play any of those others that I mentioned. And so that can't be discounted. And that last fact there is probably why it's not going to go anywhere in my collection right now, because this was a whole heck of a lot easier to get my wife to be interested in playing than Exceed. And I love Exceed, folks. I love Summoner Wars. But that is a bigger barrier to entry on a game night, on a pull it out in the middle of the afternoon while the 3-year-old is busy watching a Bluey. And that can't be discounted. And that's why something like this might ultimately find a place in your collection if you're looking for that. Now, next up, we have Esper Games' The Queen's New Capital, which is currently crowdfunding. This is probably one of the most unique, clever games that I've seen recently as a whole. And let me tell you why, because it has several different elements that you're familiar with, but it also uses them in just enough of a different slight twist that it makes it feel like it's very refreshing as a whole, with a multi-element interconnected engine that you're building via deck construction, resource management, and allocation along several different point tracks. And it gives you several different scenarios that you can do, several modules that are coming along with it, and it's all a card-driven, symbolic-based system. So it's also completely language independent if you want. And therein lies the beauty of this game as a whole. So essentially what you're doing is you're setting up the scenario and you're trying to figure out, okay, how long, what are my objectives going to be? And you get 2 double-sided cards here that give you 4 different scenarios that you can do. This card here sets up the whole scenario. 4 seals to win. If you get a tier 3 building, you get a seal. If you get a little alert, you get this thing, and that just gives you basic parameters. But how you're actually playing this on the board here is you're going to be having cards of the building types, tiers 1, 2, and 3, that are slowly upgrading based on their color, that are going to have 2 different symbols that you're going to be utilizing on them. The upper right and the lower right. The upper right is going to be affiliated with your track here of your allegiance, of the favoritism that comes with each of the 4 factions. And so as you gain faction in one of these, say the deer antler one, you may get further away from the aquatic. But if you get towards the wolf, it's going to get you further away from the scorpion. So as you go back and forth, you're going to have a different dynamic, because if you get all the way to one of the ends, not only does each faction have a specific action that can be utilized asymmetrically in order to specifically aid your engine building, but you also get one of those ever important victory seals. The other way you're going to be getting those is the lower right hand corner. You'll notice that these also have symbols there, and those correspond to the 4 tracks over here. At the end of every round, you get to take whatever symbols are down here in the lower hand corner and move each of your tracks along each of the 4 lines here correspondingly. Now here's the tricky point, and here's how you play the game. You draw up to 6 cards from your symmetric deck that you are building along the way. So you pick up 6 of these cards and you redraw back up to 6 every single game. And these cards are going to give you several different aspects that you're going to have to manage. And this is the tricky part. This is the dynamic that is semi-cooperative, but also how much can you press your luck? Each round you flip over one of these cards that has a welfare as well as a political. And it tells you individually you have to have 2 swords at the bottom of your cards or symbology present as a whole. Then on the other side, the political crisis is the global picture. Depending on your player count, you're going to have that number of crowns on cards or symbols between all players. If you get it and you're the most, you get a little bonus at the bottom. If you don't, you get one of these little fist tokens. And those are important because they go on top of your buildings, and they mean that those symbols that you were previously utilizing to go along these tracks in order to, again, as I did not mention, when you get down to the end of this track, it gives you one of those seals, ever important to score in order to achieve victory. Can't use this, can't move along here, can't win. Right? And the best part about this is you're going to get down to the end of this track, and then you're actually going to reset yourself at the end of the round back to 0, and you can do it all again, which means you can get more than 1 seal if you're really heavily into these areas. But you have to keep from having political unrest or rebellion, as they call it, and not getting these guys in the first place, because then the other aspect of your engine building that you're going to do is you're going to have two separate unique decks here. One are going to be character cards, but then they're also going to have asymmetric abilities down here at the bottom. So in this case, whenever I add a building, which is half of an upgrade, add another upgrade to another tier 1 structure. So that one's really going to help me build fast. This one, crisis action cards that add, so the blue ones that add crowns, also add an extra crown token. And that's crown tokens, because not only will these cards give you immediate benefit for that round use, as you can see here at the bottom of this blue card, this political card here, which means the other one was actually red. Sorry, I messed that up. But this gives you one for this round, and then it gives you a token, a blue and a red token, for the next future rounds that you're going to be able to use. And say if you don't use them, they may say, okay, well, either or some of the advanced cards, which we'll talk about in a second, may say, if you don't use any tokens, we'll give you an additional bonus. So how are you dynamically maneuvering that? And then each one of these crisis cards, you put up a new one per round, and you can gradually see that the numbers go up, and it becomes harder and harder, not only as the whole, but also the individual. And so you can potentially get 2 of these turn. And if you ever get 2 of them on a tier building, then any leader that you have potentially goes away. One of them does. And those leaders are the ones that you are drafting or actually recruiting through a various mechanistic rotation as you discard them, or if they get discarded, they get put into sort of a circular motion that the next person or someone else later down the line can actually take one of the ones you discarded from the top of the pile and take it for themselves. And it also refreshes the market in a unique way to not get stale. Similarly, the upgrade actions are essentially just those deck building aspects that I mentioned. You can see in the upper right hand corner here, they have the little double arrow, and they just give you a better version of several cards that you've already got, as well as other versions. So this one, 2 crowns and then plus crown for each other political card I played. So if I played a bunch of blue political cards, great. This one actually allows me to prevent a rebellion token, but it's going to cost me a victory point in the first place. So then this one also brings up one of the other more interesting aspects of this game as a whole, is that it gives you a built-in way. The often maligned biggest criticism of deck building is you get this bloat, right? I hate it. I hate it. Harry Potter, anyone? That is a horrible game for that. This card allows you to burn an extra. And what I mean by that is every single round, you can burn a card from your deck, trimming it, keeping it thin, thinning it down even further, because that's what you want out of a deck building game, is to be able to get to the good cards that are going to help you achieve these ever increasing requirements in the first place. Now, the biggest problem with this is it's all decks, right? You have the advanced action cards, you have the leader cards, you have the tiered building cards. The first 2 do a really good job of rotating through, and you're going to be buying them with enough regularity, and all of them are going to be much more utilizable in some way, shape, or form, depending on the strategy that you want to take, that it doesn't ever really necessarily become a problem, especially at the higher player counts. The problem is the buildings sometimes, as you'll see here, will move my tier card out of the way and the crisis cards out of the way. Sometimes you have purple 1, purple 2, purple 3. You have 2 and 3 of red if my starting card was red in the first place. But sometimes, you've got a yellow card out here and you don't have, any yellow on the board whatsoever. And so if that's your only building at the first place, you're going to be really struggling, because building is probably the slowest aspect of this game in a whole, because you can only have so many tiers of this in the first place. So how you choose to utilize not only the symbols that are down here, but also which ones you're optimizing in to manage this side of things as well becomes, not just build as much as you can, as quick as you can. It's, okay, how am I going to line things up to match this as you're going along? And it gives you, like I mentioned, 4 different scenarios that are going to be present that you can sort of maneuver through, that not only are going to, again, give you different ways of getting the additional seals not mentioned in this, again, giving you asymmetry between them in the first place, but also allowing you to have different crisis tokens, because as you're slowly pulling these seals off, you'll notice that right there's that little crisis token, and something happens either to you or to everyone else to allow them to catch up to you, which again balances it out. Other last aspect that I didn't mention, which is the other unique mechanic, which again solves one of the other most ubiquitous deck building problems in the first place, is this little cube down here at the bottom. This is the factions up here, but this allows you additional bonus action once per round. So once every round. So a round, if I didn't already actually say, is playing 4 of those cards from your hand of the 6 that you start out with. And this gives you scout resupply, faction action, support actions. Support actions are the modules that are going to give you different asymmetric abilities that allow you, say, like the guild masters, if you're looking at that on the crowdfunding page. The faction actions are based on if you're actually at one of the ends of all 4 of these. But then the resupply and the scout allows you to basically, do exactly what I mentioned. Get rid of some of the bad stuff that's sitting out in these deck building areas that you're going to buy, and put out more stuff, reshuffling, just implementing what's available to you. And then the resupply is just draw 2 extra cards. Draw 2 extra cards and see if you can get the card that you need this round, so that you can burn through your deck faster as well, allowing you to shuffle faster, allowing you to get back to those cards that you really need again already in the next round as a whole. So even after playing a full game of this, you start out with like 10 cards in your deck, you're only going to end up with like 15, 16 cards, which is really a nice trim deck. You're drawing anywhere from 6 to 8 cards per round. That really is an efficient engine that you were trying to build as a whole. And that's really what works in this game and makes it actually stand out from comparatively to a lot of the other deck builders that I've played. Now, I'll speak to the elephant in the room. Yeah, they're using AI art. Yeah, it's, hopefully placeholder. I mean, you can kind of see it's very generic. I really don't think the aesthetic here with the AI art, I don't think it has to be animals. I think you could just make this, cities or just something else like that. And, you crowdfund and then you pay some artist to make, 4 or 6 or 8 different images. And who cares? Because I don't really need this game to have super great artwork. It's clever in what it's doing mechanistically, and it reminds me of a lot of the Japanese games. Like, I don't care if a Japanese game is, that incorporated in terms of aesthetic. Japanese games are known for not having any aesthetic whatsoever. One of my favorite games, Rumble Nation, is one of the most bland looking games you have ever seen, but it's one of the best area control, majority squares on a map, because all it is little wooden cubes, that I've ever played. And it's a forever game in the top probably 15 of my games all time. And so the focus on the artwork here, yeah, I know people like looking at it a little bit better. Not going to get into the whole AI, ethical, that side of things. That's not for this video. But overall, the cleverness of this game is really impressive. Really impressive. I'm vastly surprised by how good this game flows. Now, the iconography, you have tons of icons that you're going to have to be dealing with, and remembering which one's the action upgrade one, which one's the character upgrade one, which one's the building upgrade one, when can I actually do this, when does this time there? Well, I mean, some of those things need to be smoothed out still. It's not perfect by any means. But is it probably one of, if not the cleverest game I've played of 2023? So as a whole, I'm really kind of impressed by this game, much more than I thought so. And it just freaking works. And the ability to have, rewards based on those crises that, again, as a semi-co-op, I wasn't sure was going to work whatsoever. And the ability for them to even give you additional actions so that you can surpass that 4 cards played per round in order to optimize going further about when you're going to use these, because there's no limit. So you could not spend them for several rounds and then all of a sudden have 7 cards or 8 turns in a single round, depending on how good and how well you've stocked up on this, along with these, making so that you never really have a shortage. The only aspect of this that, again, you may not like is that when you're playing the green cards, the upgrade, the builds, the drafting cards, those are immediate. Everyone sees those. When you play the red or the blue cards, the political or the crisis cards, the war or the crowns, you lay those face down. And so it's more of a dynamic of the dead of winter. So you don't really know what people have laid down. So if you're looking around and counting cards, you might get a general list of things, but you also might think that, I played blue and you played red and we'll both be covered. And so maybe, we'll both get one because I covered one of them for myself and then you covered the other one for everybody. Well, truth is you both played red and neither of you played enough. And then you're both going to get the red crisis as well as the blue crisis, which is going to shut off some of the symbols that are available in the buildings. And that's going to be something that you're going to have to deal with. And the other thing I'll say is that because these fists of rebellion get placed on your buildings, the biggest detriment is that the cards that remove them, sort of like the Death Eaters symbols in Harry Potter, if you will, from the deck building aspect in there, they're quite often just not as available, or you just never get them when you need them. And it becomes probably the biggest Achilles heel for this game, but also for your individual turn by turn. I'm losing on the tracks, which is ultimately going to be the best way of scoring those victory point seals in order to win the game. And that's frustrating as a whole, but is it a make it or break at this point? You know what? A little tweaking? I'm going to say no. Next up, we're talking about Ryder Games. They sent me a copy of their latest release, Garden Guess. And what you're doing is essentially very easy, right? You're just trying to connect one side of the board to the other side of your board. And if you're paying attention here, you'll notice that there are 3 different colors in this game. You have gold connecting this way, black connecting this way on the hexagon, and white connecting here to here. And so all you have to do is get a contiguous straight line through these hexes from one side to the other. Sounds like a little bit more of a fancy version of TOC. And in a way, it kind of is. The other thing you need to know is it's very heavy. Take that, and it's it's very heavy abstract in a nutshell, even though we have the garden theme incorporated. And what you're going to be doing is just basically summed up by 3 separate actions on the board itself. The first of which is you're going to be having these little guests that are going to be occupying different spaces on the board. The first thing that you're going to be doing is just drawing cards, because you only have so many cards in your hand. That's where the numbers come in. You choose one of these, you take that many cards from the deck, 3, then you flip it over. Next time you use that card, well, you get 2, but then you get to the 3 back next time. This one is a 1 and a 4 respectively. That's how you refill your hand of these different flower cards in the first place. And there are several different types of flower cards, 5 in fact, plus a wild here. These correspond to the tokens up here in the upper right hand corner, because these are going to be part of the second main action that you're taking. Is you take one of these flower types that you have in your hand, as many as you may have, and now you can see I drew all different 5 of them right there. And as soon as you have as many as you want to spend, you get to choose. And laying down these cards is the next path that you're going to be taking as the second and the third actions. So in this case, the 2 tulips. I could be taking one of these colonies here, and I could be saying, okay, I want to capture this, because the third action that we're talking about here is going to be connecting these 2 spots, these 2 colonies. But you have to have control of 2 colonies that you may be going back and forth from. Doesn't matter where they are though, and this is the tricky part, right? As with a lot of these types of games, you're not just branching off from the white to the white or yellow to the yellow. You're starting at your starting area. There's no starting areas in this game. So if you want to say, use these tulip cards that I just mentioned, move these number tiles out of the way, and I want to get this tulip right here, well, I just have to play these 2 tulips, and that determines the size or the stack that goes onto this tulip in the first place. Now, for someone else to take that or control this, they have to play more than what I played. So to mark and remember which one this is, you grab one of the little tulips, but you can still see that it's the gold underneath, so that it's my control. Now I have to have another little pagoda tile here to be able to connect it. And therein lies then the next phase of things, is I would have to have another tulip card and one of these flowers in order to actually connect it. So if you look at my hand, well, I don't have that, but I do have one here of this, and I have my wild. So then what I get to do is I get to place 2 of these tiles here, and then as soon as this has been connected, then these permanently become mine. And so then, and only then, do you start seeing how you're building your tracks from gold to gold, white to white, and black to black. Therein lies both the blessing and the curse and the heavy take that nature, because you're going to be disrupting those towers before other people can claim them permanently. And if you can't, then you're going to lose out very quickly. And so this is a very, very aggressive game. It actually plays anywhere from 2 to 6 people, and you can play in 1, 2, or even 3 teams depending on the numbers of players that are available there. Sometimes the teams may be uneven depending on the player count, or if you play with 3, well, then you obviously have 1 in each color. The fourth action that you only take when you're playing with teams is you can pass your teammates some cards. Apart from that, pros, cons, and everything else in between, well, pro is, again, the ease of simplicity, the abstract nature. I love abstracts in general, so I'm a little bit biased in the first place. The part of things that you really may not like, though, is this is super, super aggressive. Take that. If you have any passing disinterest in that, this game is not going to appeal to you whatsoever. Also, this deck is actually relatively robust, and you're going to be left sometimes just not drawing the cards you need. And so the other side of things is, you look at these and you want to go maybe this one to this one, but I maybe just want to skip straight from this one now to this one in order to bridge some of this gap. But as you start to get closer to the edges, your opponents are actually going to not be able to get past you. And so how aggressive you are, especially at a 3-player or 3-team count, can be kind of off-putting as well, because frankly speaking, you can just actually be eliminated before the game is over in the first place if someone cuts you off and you just can't get past, especially in the 3-player game. I really like the card management system of drawing and flipping to give a little bit of variety, but it's also kind of just a little unnecessary too, because unless you're playing with a team, I don't see why it was absolutely necessary to have different numbers and why you just didn't make it a standard 3 or something along those lines. You do have a maximum hand size of 15, so it gets a little bit ticket to ridey there if you're familiar with that, strategy where you just load up as many cards in your hand and do as many as you can down from one place to the other. So there's a real strategy to trying to be, okay, I'm thinking at first in the game, I'm going to take these minute sections, but I may just get over here to over here, not get any anything in between, high risk, high reward, just like in Ticket to Ride, right? And then all of a sudden have enough to connect all of these hexes that go, you know, for 4 or 5 different spaces a length. And then, you know what? And so that's something you can't really mitigate. That's something you can't really take out. And I guess that's something you really can't stop your opponent from doing on this board if they've only got the 2 placed over here. But again, you know, you're going to look at that and maybe say, well, I'm not going to mess with them because I'm not going to worry about it. But you may have to be then going in this middle one here to try and disrupt them from having the ability to go that far, or now having to go around. So your mileage may vary heavily depending on what you think of this game. I'll be honest with you, I'm not really sure where I see this game falling. I like the abstract nature. I think the aesthetic also just didn't need to be as the way it was. You can see on the board here, pink, pink, pink. The iconography with some of these, right, with the purples, doesn't actually necessarily line up nicely with the cards. I mean, it's not terribly bad. That little corner graphic here is probably the best part to help you line up with which one it is. But I also don't know why you just didn't make them clearly different colors, because again, the first game or two, my wife and I were just like, you know what, this is just a little bit all too close together when you've got all this pink just kind of going there. It could have just been easily drastically different, and it wouldn't change the overall aesthetic value of flowers, because guaranteed there are flowers of those colors too. So that was kind of a weird choice, and it makes it just a little bit harder to decipher as you're playing. Doesn't make it difficult by any means, but it was just kind of an odd choice in both of our heads. The other side of things is, as a 3-player game, I'm not really sure I would ever want to play it with a 3-player situation. Again, not because I don't like the mechanisms or I don't think it works in that sense, but you're probably almost going to routinely have someone get eliminated by the nature of creating these paths on the board. And in this game, where the game could go very quickly, but it also could go very slowly, depending on, you know, okay, I'm going to take over your tower, and then you're going to take over my tower, and then I'm going to have to maneuver you around this way, and then you're going to have to move it around this way. It could get a little long in that sense as well, and it may overstay its welcome. I mean, we actually got to a point in the last 2 games that we played where one of us was just completely out, that we hadn't completely crossed the whole board, but it was so significant because you start actually working your way middle outwards sometimes rather than edge to edge, that we just both looked at each other and we said, hey, there's no coming back from this, right? Yeah, you're right. You know, we hadn't fully connected to one edge, or we hadn't fully completely cut out the other person in terms of their availability in a theoretical situation, but we both looked at each other and said, it's sort of like a chess, right? And we said, there's no chance that you're going to win this. Okay, let's just quit right here. Game over, right? And both blessing that you can start to tell that, but also when you've been playing for 20 or 25 minutes already, and you know, it's not a 5 to 10 minute game where it kind of quickly does that and settles out and you can play it again. We don't know. I could see myself going either way with it again from that sense. The jury is still out on this one. I don't really know what to tell you about whether or not I'm going to keep it, because again, like I said, I'm biased and I like the abstract nature of this, because again, it reminds me in a very obtuse way of talk, where you're trying to, you know, be the one on the top of the stack, but you're trying to connect one side to the other. So I like that. I have no problem with it. Take that. But it just does a combination of things that I'm just not sure where things are going to settle ultimately in my collection when the dust actually dries. So we'll see. In theory, I was actually expecting to like this one a lot more. I played this back to back recently with Boop, the other abstract game. I actually preferred Boop. My wife said, though, that she preferred this one. So take that for what you will, but we're going to see where this one goes and whether or not it's going to stand the test of time, because right now, I'm sorry, guys, I just don't know. There you go. That is it. That is everything you need to know about those games. Hopefully that was a little bit helpful, a little bit all in one there. I love doing these reviews combined all together, so it gives you a little bit glimpse of everything all at once, everything across the board, mechanically, thematically, and now crowdfunding and retail. So there you go. Thoughts, questions, concerns, let me know down below, and I'm always happy to address them as much as I can. Ish. Stay classy. Have a great freaking day.